Okay, this will be another podcast on psychohistory. Um, I'm not going to go through all the psycho classes again. I'm not going to define and delineate all the psycho classes and all the historical examples of it and what they are and all that. I did that 2 times before. If you don't know what psychohistory is, if you don't know, have a fracking clue what I'm talking about, then I would recommend you either go listen to my first podcast on this, psycho class, or if you just don't, want to listen to my voice or whatever, or if you thought that other podcast, psycho class, was convoluted or hard to follow, or just whatever, then I would suggest going to the website psychohistory.org or .com. It's either org or com. It's psychohistory, and so I was thinking about this psychohistory stuff, and you go from early infanticidal to late infanticidal to abandoning to ambivalent. And when you go from abandoning, the abandoning mode of parenting is correlated with the feudal political system, and the ambivalent mode of parenting is correlated with the monarchical political system, the absolute monarchy. No need to get into what that is. And I use examples of like France and Britain. You went from feudal societies to like the age of the absolute monarch, or like the enlightened monarchy, or whatever they wanted to call it. It was basically just, the king rules the stuff. The king is the executive branch. But I was thinking, well, that's what happened in France and Britain and Germany to an extent. Germany's kind of in between two worlds. But that's not what happened in Russia. In Russia, you, instead of going from feudal to like straight up monarchy. I mean, they all call themselves monarchies, but in Russia, you went from feudalism to what they called communism, which was at first the dictatorship of the proletariat, more commonly known as Stalinism. And so I was thinking, well, it seemed, and this is also what happened in China, and so it seems like there is that there is a split, that once you go from feudalism, that once you go from abandoning to ambivalent, it's like countries kind of have a choice of either going from feudalism to either monarchies or to the dictatorship of the proletariat, which is a dictatorship. Either go from a dictatorship or a dictatorship, either one that is communist based or one that is like nationalist base, or whatever you want to call it. And I was looking at this and I was thinking, well, what do the I was looking at this and I was thinking, well, what would account for this difference in paths between, say, Russia and Britain? And I was thinking, well, since the political systems that the masses desire seems to reflect childhood parenting styles, then it seems that the parenting styles would also reflect this difference from monarchy versus dictatorship of the proletariat. And we know that British parenting styles was a lot less egalitarian than Russian parenting styles. Like, you had the oldest son would inherit all the land, whereas in Russian families it was a little bit more egalitarian. All the siblings were treated the same. And apparently this manifested itself in the political systems of both places. And so that's my working theory. You had the same thing happen with China. It could also have something to do with a feudal society having to come up with something new when surrounded by, like you say, you have a feudal society surrounded by a bunch of socialized societies, which is like modern societies, or even intrusive societies. That feudal society is gonna have to, move forward in a different way. And it could be that Russia couldn't go from feudalism to monarchy because they were surrounded by a bunch of other states that were not monarchies. And they were surrounded by a bunch of other states that were not monarchies, and so monarchism would be didn't have the argument from morality that it did for back when there were no intrusive or socialized states. Like say like it's not like Russia, like if a feudal Russia existed like on its own and was not surrounded by say France or Britain or even to a lesser extent Germany, if Russia was not surrounded by these places, then perhaps Russia could have gone from feudalism to absolute monarchies. But because it was surrounded by those places, it couldn't go to an absolute monarchy. It had to go to something else because the existence of like capitalist countries made the argument for absolute monarchy ring hollow in some way. And I think my audience is sophisticated enough that I don't have to explain why that would be. And so that's my two theories. It could either it's because of the parenting styles in Russia that caused Russia to go, instead of going from feudalism to absolute monarchy, caused Russia to go from feudalism to the dictatorship of the proletariat, or it could be that Russia was surrounded by a bunch of capitalist countries, which for whatever reason made monarchistic arguments ring hollow, or it could be a combination of those things. And I'm leaning toward the combination. I don't know which is more important. I also know that China went down this path. China went from feudalism to the dictatorship of the proletariat. But this is not how Japan went. Japan, for whatever reason, went from feudalism to the Meiji Restoration of absolute monarchy, and then went from something else. I'm kind of at a loss for words for what happened in Japan. But Japan basically went from feudalism to absolute monarchy to intrusive mercantilism. So Japan basically went, the way England and France went, only in like hyperspeed. They were kind of behind when they were feudalists, but then they caught up for whatever reason. Basically because they had technology from the West, and they had a whole bunch of things that we don't need to get into that allowed Japan to catch up to the rest catch up to the intrusive mode of parenting and the mercantilist economic system that accompanied it a lot faster than Britain went from feudalism to mercantilism. But China, on the other hand, went from feudalism to the dictatorship of the proletariat. And I don't know why that would be. I don't know enough about Chinese parenting modes, but if I just had to guess off the top of my head, and this is really bad. I'm really just taking a blind guess here. But my blind guess is that China has egalitarian parenting styles. And when I say it has egalitarian parenting styles, I mean that it has egalitarian parenting styles between siblings. Not that the parent-child relationship is egalitarian, but that the parents treat the children about the same, or maybe like merit-based. Like the state treats its applicants based on merit or something like that. And like the parents treat the children based on merit, not age or birth order or whatever. And that may be why China went from instead of going to monarchism, went to dictatorship of the proletariat. Or it could also be or it could also just be that it was caused by China being behind everyone else, and so the arguments for absolute monarchy rang hollow, or a mixture of both. Same deal with Russia. And so you go from dictatorship of the proletariat, you go from ambivalent, which on one side is monarchies, or dictatorship of the proletariat. And so I guess, for lack of a better word, I'm going to call this like the left and right development of psychoclass. Like the left development, you go to dictatorship of the proletariat. The right development, you go to absolute monarchies. And then, after the dictatorship of the proletariat, or monarchies, you go to mercantilism. And this was also seen in the Soviet Union. A lot of people didn't know this is what happened, because the Soviets kept everything secret. But in the Soviet Union, like after, even when Stalin was still running the show, like after I think it was like the second I'm going to put this in the YouTube description. I think after the second 5-year plan, or at least, or after, or and certainly by the time after World War II, Stalin's role in the economy kind of began to decrease. Stuff began to be planned more and more by like the local Supreme Soviet, like Ukraine's economy began to be planned more by the Supreme Soviet of the Ukraine and less by Stalin himself. And even within like the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, you had more stuff being dealt with by local governments. And so basically you had what I call charter mercantilism. Now, in Britain, what you would have is you'd have the state would call together like existing companies, like they'd call together another company